Your father left you nothing but problems, Claire. Ethan Cole didn't even look at her when he said it. Snow pressed softly against the kitchen windows while the heater rattled like it was struggling to survive another Minnesota winter. Claire Whitmore stood barefoot beside the counter, one hand resting beneath the curve of her 7-month pregnant belly, the other holding a black coffee she had forgotten to drink. 3 days earlier, she had buried her father. The scent of funeral lilies still clung to her coat, hanging by the door. Ethan slid a thin envelope across the marble countertop. Divorce papers. The ultrasound photo from her last doctor visit sat inches away from them. Their baby's tiny profile stared upward beneath the cold white kitchen light. Ethan loosened his tie with a tired sigh, more annoyed than emotional. "I can't keep drowning with you," he muttered. Claire blinked slowly, as if her mind needed extra seconds to understand what her ears had just heard. Outside, headlights swept across the snowy driveway before disappearing into the dark street. The entire house suddenly felt too quiet. "My father just died," she whispered. Ethan finally looked at her then, but there was no warmth left in his eyes. Only exhaustion. Exactly. The word landed harder than shouting ever could. Claire lowered her gaze to the papers. Her fingers trembled slightly against the edge of the counter. Ethan noticed, but he said nothing. He walked past her toward the hallway closet, grabbed his wool coat, then paused only long enough to pick up his car keys. "Vanessa and I already signed a lease downtown," he said flatly. "You can keep the house if the bank doesn't take it first." Vanessa. Claire closed her eyes for half a second. She had seen the perfume stains on his shirts for months, heard the late-night business calls that ended in soft laughter. But hearing her name spoken aloud inside the kitchen, where they once painted baby room colors together, felt strangely unreal. Ethan stepped closer to the door while snow swirled outside like torn pieces of paper under the streetlights. "You need to be realistic," he added. "Your father spent his whole life pretending pride could pay bills." Claire's breathing slowed. She remembered her father sitting quietly on the porch last summer, repairing an old silver watch with careful hands while telling her that dignity mattered more than appearances. Harold Whitmore never wore expensive suits, never drove luxury cars. He lived in the same modest cedar house for 30 years and still used coupons at grocery stores. Ethan always hated that about him. Hated the old sweaters, the faded pickup truck, the silence. "Dad wasn't weak," Claire said softly. Ethan gave a humorless smile. "Weak men die broke." Then he opened the front door. Cold air rushed into the kitchen. Claire instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. Ethan walked out without touching her, without touching the ultrasound photo, without once looking back at the child that carried his last name. Through the frosted window, Claire watched him cross the driveway toward a black Mercedes waiting beneath the falling snow. A blonde woman sat in the passenger seat. Vanessa leaned over and kissed him before the car even pulled away. The taillights disappeared slowly into the white storm. Claire remained motionless beside the counter long after the sound of the engine faded. Somewhere in the house, an old clock ticked steadily through the silence. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at the screen before answering quietly. A calm male voice spoke on the other end. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully. "We've been trying to reach you regarding your father's estate." Claire pressed the phone tighter against her ear while snow continued sliding down the kitchen windows in slow white streaks. The man on the line spoke calmly, almost too formally for that hour of the night. "Miss Whitmore, my name is Daniel Bennett. I worked with your father for many years. We need to arrange a meeting regarding his estate." Claire glanced at the empty driveway where Ethan's car had disappeared only minutes earlier. The silence inside the house felt heavier now, like every room had suddenly become unfamiliar. "There must be some mistake," she said quietly. "My father did not have an estate." A pause followed. Papers shuffled softly in the background. "I assure you, there is no mistake." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. Her lower back ached from standing too long, and the baby shifted gently beneath her sweater as if reacting to her tension. She moved slowly toward the kitchen chair and sat down carefully. The divorce papers still rested beside the ultrasound photo under the dim overhead light. "Can this wait until morning?" she asked. "Of course," Mr. Bennett replied. "A driver will arrive at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Please bring your father's personal watch if you still have it." Claire frowned slightly. "His watch?" "Yes, Miss Whitmore. Your father insisted." The call ended before she could ask anything else. For several seconds, Claire simply stared at the dark phone screen in her hand. Then her gaze drifted toward the hallway. Harold Whitmore's bedroom door remained half open exactly the way he always left it. The scent of cedarwood and old books still lingered faintly inside. Claire stood slowly and walked down the narrow hallway, one hand supporting her stomach. The old hardwood floor creaked softly beneath her bare feet. Inside the bedroom, moonlight spilled across neatly folded sweaters and stacks of worn paperbacks sitting beside a reading lamp. Everything looked untouched, frozen in the quiet rhythm of her father's life. She opened the top drawer of his nightstand and found the silver watch resting exactly where he always kept it. The leather strap was cracked with age. Tiny scratches covered the metal casing. Ethan used to laugh at it during family dinners. "That thing belongs in a pawn shop," he once joked while Harold simply smiled and kept eating. Claire ran her thumb gently across the watch face. It had stopped ticking at exactly 2:17, the same time the hospital called 3 nights ago. Her throat tightened. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked around the room again. Suddenly, small things began returning to her memory. The black sedans that occasionally parked down the street late at night. The strangers in expensive coats who sometimes greeted her father with quiet respect at the grocery store. The annual phone calls he always took alone every November. As a child, Claire thought he was hiding debts. Ethan believed the same thing. But now, sitting in the silence of that dim bedroom, something felt different. Her father had never seemed afraid. Tired sometimes, quiet often, but never afraid. Wind rattled softly against the windows while snow covered the yard outside in smooth white layers. Claire looked down at the stopwatch in her hands. Beneath the moonlight, she noticed something she had never seen before. Tiny engraved initials hidden near the clasp. H.W., followed by a symbol she did not recognize. Her heartbeat slowed. Somewhere far downtown, Ethan was probably drinking champagne in a warm penthouse beside Vanessa Hale. He thought he had walked away from a sinking life tonight. Claire lowered her eyes toward the watch again as the old metal reflected pale, silver light across her fingertips. Then, very softly, the watch began ticking again. The ticking continued through the night like a heartbeat hidden inside the walls of the old house. Claire barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan sliding the divorce papers across the counter with the same expression someone might use while canceling a gym membership. No anger, no guilt, just convenience. Pale winter light crept slowly through the curtains by the time morning arrived. Snow covered the front yard in thick white silence, untouched except for the narrow tracks left behind by Ethan's car the night before. Claire stood carefully in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing trembling fingers through her blonde hair while steam fogged the glass around her reflection. Her eyes looked swollen from exhaustion. She rested one hand beneath her stomach and inhaled slowly. The baby shifted gently again, grounding her for a moment. Downstairs, the old grandfather clock chimed 9 times. Right on schedule, headlights swept across the front windows. Claire parted the curtain slightly. 2 black SUVs sat outside the house, engines idling quietly beneath the falling snow. Men in dark wool coats stepped out with practiced precision. Not hurried, not aggressive, controlled. One of them opened an umbrella near the front walk despite the light snowfall. Claire frowned. Nothing about this felt normal. A soft knock echoed through the house. She opened the door cautiously. The man standing there appeared to be in his late 50s, silver-haired, clean-cut, wearing leather gloves and a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly salary. His expression softened slightly when he saw her. "Miss Whitmore," he said politely. "I am Daniel Bennett." Claire nodded once. "You called last night." His eyes briefly lowered toward her stomach before returning respectfully to her face. "May we come in?" Warm air carried the faint scent of cedar and coffee through the hallway as they entered. The men behind him remained outside near the vehicles. Mr. Bennett removed his gloves carefully and glanced around the modest living room. His gaze lingered on Harold Whitmore's old recliner beside the fireplace. For the first time, emotion touched his face. "Your father loved this chair," he murmured quietly. Claire stared at him in confusion. "How well did you know him?" Mr. Bennett looked toward the snow-covered windows before answering. "Long enough to know he was the most disciplined man I have ever met." Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement. Disciplined? Her father forgot birthdays, wore the same boots for 10 years, and repaired broken appliances instead of replacing them. Nothing about Harold Whitmore suggested importance. Mr. Bennet carefully placed a slim black folder onto the coffee table. "Before we leave," he said calmly, "your father instructed me to ask for the watch." Claire hesitated. Then she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and handed him the silver watch. The moment he saw it, something changed in the room. Mr. Bennet straightened slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for Claire to notice. He turned the watch over in his gloved hand and studied the engraved symbol beneath the clasp. Then, without a word, he pressed his thumb gently against the center of the casing. A quiet click echoed through the room. The back compartment opened. Claire's breath caught instantly. Hidden inside the watch was a tiny black key. Mr. Bennet looked at her carefully. "Your father trusted very few people," he said. "But he trusted you." Claire stared at the key resting inside the old silver watch while snow drifted silently beyond the windows. "What is this?" she whispered. Mr. Bennet closed the watch slowly. "Miss Whitmore," he replied softly, "your father did not leave behind debt." He paused. "He left behind an empire." Claire did not speak during the drive downtown. Snow melted slowly against the tinted windows of the black SUV while Minneapolis blurred past in cold gray silence outside. Mr. Bennet sat beside her with calm posture, occasionally answering quiet phone calls in short, precise sentences Claire could barely follow. Every few minutes, her fingers drifted toward the silver watch resting inside her coat pocket, as if touching it might somehow explain everything happening around her. The city skyline rose ahead through the snowfall, steel and glass disappearing into low winter clouds. Claire recognized most of the buildings from a distance, but the vehicle eventually turned onto a private street she had never noticed before. At the end stood a tower of dark reflective glass, with no company logo visible anywhere on the exterior. Two men opened the SUV door before Claire even reached for the handle. Warm air rushed toward her as she stepped onto polished black stone beneath the entrance awning. Inside, the lobby was impossibly quiet. Marble floors reflected soft golden light from hanging chandeliers above. Men and women in tailored suits crossed the room carrying tablets and folders. But the moment Claire entered, something strange happened. Conversation stopped. People looked up. Then one by one, they stood. No one smiled broadly. No one applauded. It was quieter than that. Respectful. Controlled. Like a room preparing for someone important. Claire slowed her steps immediately. "I think they are confusing me with someone else," she whispered nervously. Mr. Bennet simply gestured toward the elevators. "No, Miss Whitmore," he replied softly. "They are not." Her stomach tightened as they entered a private elevator lined with dark walnut panels and brushed gold trim. The numbers climbed quickly. 42 floors. 48. 53. Claire stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors. Her cream-colored maternity sweater suddenly felt painfully simple against all this luxury. Ethan would have loved this building. She could already hear the admiration in his voice, the ambition lighting up his eyes. He spent years chasing rooms exactly like these. The elevator finally opened onto a private executive floor so silent she could hear the faint click of her own boots against the stone hallway. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire skyline, revealing snow falling over the Mississippi River far below. At the center of the room stood a long black conference table surrounded by at least 20 executives. Every seat was occupied except one, the chair at the head of the table. Claire stopped walking. "I cannot be here," she said quietly. "There has to be a mistake." No one answered immediately. Then an older woman with silver hair stood slowly from her seat. "Your father always said you would say that first." Claire looked at her in confusion. The woman smiled faintly before placing a thick leather folder onto the table. Embossed in silver across the cover were two words Claire had never seen before. "Whitmore Holdings." Mr. Bennet carefully pulled out the chair at the head of the table for her. "Please sit, Miss Whitmore." Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she lowered herself into the chair. Across from her, screens along the conference room walls slowly illuminated. Numbers appeared first, then properties, oil fields, international banks, private aviation companies, technology firms, shipping routes, entire skyscrapers. Claire stared at the endless list while the colors slowly drained from her face. "No," she whispered under her breath. "This is impossible." Mr. Bennet opened the leather folder carefully and slid a single photograph toward her. It showed her father standing beside presidents, royalty, and global financial leaders decades earlier. Younger, sharper, powerful. Harold Whitmore looked directly into the camera with the same calm eyes that once helped her fix bicycles in the garage. Claire felt her throat tighten instantly. "Who was my father?" she asked softly. The room fell completely still before Mr. Bennet finally answered. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully, "your father was one of the wealthiest men in the world." Claire stared at the photograph for so long that the edges began to blur beneath her fingertips. Her father stood beside men she recognized from television interviews and magazine covers. Yet he wore the same calm expression he always carried while watering tomato plants in the backyard or fixing loose cabinet doors in their small kitchen. Nothing about the image matched the life she had known. The conference room remained silent around her, 20 executives waiting patiently while snow drifted beyond the glass walls high above Minneapolis. Claire finally looked up. "Why would he hide this from me?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Mr. Bennet folded his hands carefully on the table. "Because your father believed wealth destroys ordinary love faster than poverty ever could." Claire swallowed slowly. The words settled heavily inside her chest. Memories suddenly replayed differently in her mind. The old truck her father refused to replace. The simple Christmas gifts. The way he quietly watched people before trusting them. Ethan mocking the cheap neighborhood during dinner parties. Harold never reacting, never defending himself, as if he had already learned long ago that silence revealed more than explanations ever could. Mr. Bennet opened another folder and slid several documents toward her. "Whitmore Holdings controls interests in finance, energy, shipping, technology, and real estate across 41 countries, he explained calmly. "Your father built most of it before the age of 40. Claire looked down at the pages filled with impossible numbers. Entire columns stretched beyond anything she could comprehend. Billions, hundreds of billions, private assets, international trusts. Her fingertips pressed instinctively against her stomach as if grounding herself physically was the only way to stay steady. "This cannot be real," she whispered. "It is very real," the silver-haired woman across the table replied gently. "And now it belongs to you." Claire immediately shook her head. "No, I am not qualified for any of this." Several executives exchanged faint, knowing glances, almost amused by the response. "Mr. Bennet's expression softened. "Your father predicted you would say exactly that." He reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope with Claire's name written across the front in familiar handwriting. The sight of Harold's careful script nearly shattered her composure. Her fingers trembled as she opened it slowly. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Claire, if you are reading this, it means I was not able to tell you everything myself. I am sorry for that. But I needed you to live at least part of your life loved for who you are and not for what our name could buy." Claire paused, blinking rapidly while emotion tightened her throat. Around her, the executives respectfully lowered their eyes. She continued reading silently. "Wealth attracts admiration very easily. Character does not. So I chose to raise you where kindness still mattered. I let the world underestimate us because it protected you. If the wrong people walk away when life becomes difficult, let them. They were never strong enough to walk beside you in the first place." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Ethan's face flashed through her mind instantly. The divorce papers. Vanessa's smile inside the Mercedes. His voice calling her father weak. Snow continued falling beyond the towering windows while warmth from hidden fireplaces softened the massive room around her. Mr. Bennet waited until she folded the letter carefully against her chest. Then he spoke again. "There is one more matter you should know." Claire looked up slowly. "Your husband's company recently entered merger negotiations with one of Whitmore Holdings' subsidiaries." Her heartbeat paused. "What company?" Mr. Bennet slid another document across the table. The logo printed at the top made Claire's stomach tighten immediately. "Cole Mercer Capital, Ethan's firm." Mr. Bennet met her gaze calmly. "As of this morning," he said softly, "every final approval now belongs to you." Claire barely touched the food placed in front of her that evening. The private dining room overlooking the frozen river glowed with soft amber light, while servers moved silently between tables carrying crystal glasses and polished silver trays, but none of it felt real to her. Her entire life had tilted sideways in less than 24 hours. Across from her, Mr. Bennett reviewed documents on a tablet while snow drifted against the tall windows behind him. Your father prepared everything years ago, he said calmly. Every transition plan, every trust, every contingency. Claire lowered her eyes to the untouched tea beside her plate. Why me? She asked quietly. There are people in that building who understand this world better than I do. Mr. Bennett gave a faint smile. Your father trusted intelligence, but he valued character more. Claire leaned back slowly against the chair, exhaustion pressing into her shoulders. Since arriving at Whitmore Holdings, strangers had addressed her with respect she had never experienced before. Doors opened before she touched them. Executives stood when she entered rooms. Even the driver who brought her coat earlier treated her with careful professionalism, as if she already belonged in a world she still could not comprehend. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. Ethan. Claire stared at the screen while the vibration continued. 3 missed calls already. Another message appeared moments later. Ethan, we need to talk. Claire looked away without answering. Hours earlier, he had walked out of their house believing he escaped failure. Now his messages arrived one after another like cracks forming beneath thin ice. Mr. Bennett noticed her expression but said nothing. Instead, he slid another folder across the table. Tomorrow evening, he said, Whitmore Holdings will host the Mercer Acquisition Gala at the Grand Crescent Hotel. Claire immediately recognized the name. Ethan once spent weeks trying to secure an invitation to an event there. He used to stand in front of the mirror adjusting his tie before networking dinners, rehearsing conversations with wealthy investors while criticizing her father's old-fashioned lifestyle. That world respects success, he always said, not sentiment. Claire slowly opened the folder. Inside rested a formal invitation embossed in silver lettering beside her name. Claire Whitmore, chairwoman, Whitmore Holdings. Her chest tightened slightly at the title. It did not feel like her name anymore. Ethan will be there, she asked quietly. Yes, Mr. Bennett replied. His company believes tomorrow's merger will change their future. Claire looked out toward the river below. Tiny snowflakes spun beneath the city lights while black cars moved silently through downtown streets. Somewhere among them, Ethan was probably sitting inside his expensive apartment with Vanessa, still believing he understood how power worked. Still believing wealth looked like luxury watches and penthouses and curated social circles. Harold Whitmore owned more than nations, yet spent Saturday mornings repairing neighbors' broken fences for free. Claire suddenly understood something painful and beautiful at the same time. Her father never hid because he was ashamed. He hid because he wanted one honest thing in his life. Her. Mr. Bennett studied her carefully across the table. There is no requirement for revenge, Miss Whitmore, he said softly. Your father specifically requested that no decisions be driven by anger. Claire remained silent for several moments. Then she looked down at her reflection in the dark tea beside her untouched plate. Tired eyes, soft blonde hair, one hand resting protectively against the child Ethan abandoned before ever meeting. I am not interested in revenge, she said quietly. Outside, snow continued falling over Minneapolis in slow white silence while the city lights reflected against the frozen river below. Claire lifted the invitation once more and traced her fingertips across the silver lettering of her new title. Then, for the first time since Ethan walked away, she smiled very slightly. I just want him to see what he walked away from. The Grand Crescent Hotel glittered against the Minneapolis skyline like a frozen jewel suspended above the river, its glass facade reflecting thousands of moving lights from the city below. Inside, the atmosphere was carefully controlled, every detail designed to signal power without a single word spoken aloud. Crystal chandeliers cast warm gold across marble floors while orchestral music flowed softly through the main ballroom. Claire stood near the entrance for a brief moment before stepping inside, her hand gently resting over the side of her stomach. The movement was instinctive now, grounding her. She wore a simple ivory satin dress chosen by Whitmore Holdings' stylist team, not extravagant, not loud, but impossibly elegant in its restraint. Heads turned the moment she entered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Glasses lowered slightly. It was not recognition of fame, but recognition of authority. Claire noticed it immediately, though she did not yet fully understand it. Mr. Bennett walked slightly behind her, not as an escort, but as someone confirming presence rather than announcing it. Everyone important is already here, he said quietly, including Mercer Capital. Claire followed his gaze across the room. At the far end of the ballroom stood Ethan Cole. He looked different under the lights of this world. Sharper suit, perfect posture, confident smile. Vanessa stood beside him in a shimmering black dress, leaning slightly into his arm as if they belonged in this environment together. Ethan was laughing with a group of investors, gesturing as he spoke, completely unaware that anything in his life had changed beyond what he could see. Claire stopped walking. For a brief second, the noise of the room faded. Ethan turned slightly as if sensing something, and his eyes met hers across the distance. The smile on his face did not disappear immediately. It hesitated, then softened into confusion. Claire did not look away. She simply stood still, calm, composed, unreadable. Vanessa noticed the shift in Ethan's attention and followed his gaze. Her expression changed almost instantly, a flicker of uncertainty passing through her polished confidence. Ethan excused himself and began walking toward Claire, each step slower than the last. "Claire," he said when he finally reached her, voice lowering as if trying to contain surprise. "What are you doing here?" Claire studied him quietly. There was no anger in her expression, no trembling, only distance. "I was invited," she replied evenly. Ethan let out a short, uneasy laugh, glancing toward Mr. Bennett behind her. "This is a private investor event. You must be mistaken." Mr. Bennett stepped forward slightly. "There is no mistake," he said calmly. Ethan frowned, shifting his attention between them. "Invited by who?" Before Claire could answer, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. A soft tone echoed through the room, signaling the beginning of the formal program. At the center stage, executives began moving into position. The Mercer Capital logo appeared on the large screen behind them. Ethan immediately turned back toward the stage, relieved. "Perfect timing," he said under his breath. "The merger announcement." Claire followed his gaze silently. The room settled. Conversations stopped completely. A senior executive approached the microphone and smiled toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for a historic acquisition agreement between Mercer Capital and Whitmore Holdings." Ethan straightened immediately, pride returning to his posture. He leaned slightly toward Vanessa. "Whitmore Holdings must be the silent partner backing this deal," he whispered confidently. Vanessa nodded, impressed. Claire remained still. The executive continued. "Before we proceed with final signatures, we would like to formally introduce the chairwoman of Whitmore Holdings." A pause followed. The lights shifted subtly toward the center aisle. Every head in the room turned slowly toward Claire. Ethan's expression changed first from confidence to confusion, then from confusion to disbelief. The executive extended his hand toward her. "Please welcome Miss Claire Whitmore." The room remained perfectly silent as Claire took a single step forward. Claire took one step forward into the center of the ballroom, and the entire atmosphere changed in a way that was almost physical. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, expectant, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Cameras from the press corner adjusted instantly, lenses focusing with quiet precision. Ethan stood frozen halfway between the stage and the crowd, his expression locked between disbelief and denial. Vanessa's hand slipped slightly from his arm, unnoticed. Claire continued walking. Each step was calm, measured, unhurried. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at the cameras. Her eyes were only forward. The executive on stage stepped aside respectfully as she approached. The microphone was adjusted for her height, but she did not immediately speak. Instead, she looked out at the audience, at the investors, at the board members, at the executives who had once decided her father was nothing more than a quiet man in a simple house. Then she turned slightly. Her gaze landed on Ethan. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Not confidence, not control, recognition, the kind that arrives too late to change anything. Claire finally spoke, her voice calm and clear, carrying effortlessly across the room without needing to be raised. "Good evening." That was all she said at first. A pause followed. No one moved. She continued, still steady, still composed. "I understand there has been some confusion about my presence here." A faint ripple moved through the crowd, but no one interrupted. Ethan took a small step forward, as if trying to reclaim reality. "Claire, what is this?" he called out quietly, but his voice did not carry the same authority it used to. Claire did not answer him directly. Instead, she turned slightly toward the audience again. My name is Claire Whitmore, she said. And as of today, I am the primary beneficiary and appointed chairwoman of Whitmore Holdings. The room shifted. Subtle reactions spread like a wave. Papers were adjusted. Phones lowered. Whispered confirmations began between executives. Ethan's face tightened. That is not possible, he said louder now, stepping fully into the open space. You are her daughter. You do not run anything. Claire finally looked at him again. This time, her expression carried something he had never seen before. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. My father never told me everything, she said softly. But he made sure I would eventually learn the truth. The screen behind them changed. Financial structures, global holdings, and executive confirmations appeared in layered precision. Ethan stared at it, his confidence collapsing piece by piece. Vanessa stepped back slightly, her eyes scanning the room as realization began to form. Mr. Bennett moved closer to Claire's side and placed a document on the podium. Effective immediately, he announced. All merger decisions regarding Mercer Capital require final authorization from Whitmore Holdings leadership. Ethan turned sharply toward him. This is a mistake, he insisted. We already negotiated terms. Mr. Bennett looked at him calmly. Negotiations are no longer relevant without approval. A long silence followed. Ethan turned back to Claire. His voice lowered. Claire, we can fix this. Whatever this is, we can talk privately. For the first time, something like hesitation crossed his expression, but Claire did not step toward him. She simply observed him the way one observes something familiar that no longer carries meaning. You left my home the night my father died, she said quietly. No accusation, only fact. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words followed. Claire continued, her tone unchanged. You decided what my life was worth without knowing who I was. The room remained completely still. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Claire placed both hands lightly on the edge of the podium. Tonight, she said, you will receive the answer to that decision. The words lingered in the air long after Claire finished speaking, as if the ballroom itself refused to immediately accept what had just been declared. Then, slowly, reality began to shift. The massive screen behind the stage stabilized on a final confirmation page displaying Whitmore Holdings governance authorization protocols. A single highlighted line remained visible, final approval authority, Chairwoman Claire Whitmore. Ethan stood completely still, staring at the screen as though repetition might reverse what he had just seen. His jaw tightened, then loosened slightly as confusion gave way to something far heavier. This is not real, he said again, but his voice no longer carried certainty. Vanessa stepped back another half step, her earlier composure completely gone. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for anyone who might validate what she still could not accept. No one did. Claire remained at the podium. Her expression had not changed. No satisfaction, no triumph, only calm. Mr. Bennett approached from her side and placed a single document in front of her. The Mercer Capital merger proposal requires your decision, he said quietly. Ethan's head snapped up immediately. Wait, he interrupted, stepping forward again. We have a signed agreement. We have investors committed. You cannot just override that. Claire finally looked at him directly. The silence that followed was sharper than any raised voice. You signed expectations based on incomplete information, she said. That is not the same as ownership. Ethan's breath tightened slightly. For the first time that night, his confidence cracked in a visible way. He turned toward the executives in the room, looking for support, for recognition, for structure. But every face remained neutral, professional, final. Claire, he said again, softer now. We built something together. She paused for a brief moment. The phrase hung between them like a memory neither of them could fully claim anymore. You built your version of it, she replied. Without me. A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Ethan swallowed, his throat visibly tightening. If this is about your father, he continued, struggling to steady his tone, I never meant disrespect. I was stressed. I made a mistake. Claire's gaze did not shift. You did not make a mistake, she said gently. You made a decision. The distinction landed heavily. Vanessa turned her head slightly, suddenly aware of how far she stood from both of them, both socially and emotionally. Mr. Bennett opened the document in front of Claire and waited. You have 3 options, he said calmly. Approve the merger, delay the merger, or terminate it entirely. Ethan took a step closer, urgency breaking through his control. "Claire, please, do not do this in front of everyone." She looked at him for a long moment. Not as a partner, not as someone from her past, but as someone she had already stepped beyond. "You left when I had nothing," she said quietly, "and you did not look back." Ethan's expression tightened, but no response followed. Claire lowered her eyes briefly to the document in front of her. The pen was placed carefully beside it. The entire ballroom waited without movement. Cameras did not click. Conversations did not resume. Even the air felt suspended. Claire picked up the pen slowly. The motion was deliberate, steady, unhurried. Ethan's breathing became audible in the silence. Vanessa looked down. Mr. Bennett did not move. Claire signed one time. The ink dried instantly under the bright stage lights. A notification appeared across every screen in the ballroom. Mercer Capital Merger. Pending decision overridden final authorization. Declined. Ethan stared at the screen. For several seconds, he did not speak. Then he whispered, barely audible, "You are ending everything." Claire placed the pen back on the table and finally looked at him one last time. Her voice was calm, almost soft. "No," she said. "You ended it the night you walked away." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stood there, motionless, as the weight of every assumption he had ever made collapsed at once. Claire stepped away from the podium. No dramatic exit. No hesitation. Just movement forward. As she passed him, she did not stop. She did not look back. The ballroom remained frozen behind her as she walked toward the exit, one hand gently resting on her stomach, the other steady at her side. Outside the glass doors, snow was still falling over Minneapolis in quiet layers. A black car waited at the curb. The door opened as she approached. Before stepping inside, Claire paused for only a brief moment. Behind her, through the glass, Ethan remained in the center of a world that no longer responded to him. Then she entered the car, and the door closed softly. The city lights reflected across the window as the vehicle pulled away, leaving everything he thought he controlled fading slowly into the winter night.